Well, we are in the second week of our series. The series is titled Moving Beyond Denial. And in this series, our goal, our heart's desire is that we look at the life of Peter and we take and look at those lessons. And as we look at those lessons, we take something from that to apply to our individual lives. Now today we're going to kind of camp out in Matthew chapter 16. If you have your Bibles and want to pull those out, you're certainly welcome to do so. All our scripture text will be on our screen as well. But as we begin to read our text this morning, let me just say that everything about this story, at least to me, seems kind of strange. Seems kind of peculiar. Just seems off just a little bit. This is what I mean. Matthew chapter 16, focusing specifically on verses 21 through 23, but then all the verses that are prior to that as well we're going to be looking at. Yeah, this is what we find in verse 21 through 23. It says, "From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead." But Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him, meaning reprimand Jesus, for saying such things. "Heaven forbid, Lord," he said, "this will never happen to you." And so Jesus turns to Peter and he says, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Can anybody here say, ouch? Right? That's like a whoa moment. Amen? Now, as I said, this account really strikes me as kind of strange. Because here we have Peter, who starts off in this text where he is rebuking Jesus, which, let's be honest, that takes some guts, doesn't it? I mean, he comes, he stands up to Jesus and says, "Jesus, you've lost your mind." But then Jesus does something that none of us want to ever experience, and that is he rebukes Peter. Am I right? We don't want to experience that, do we? I mean, we love the love of Jesus. We don't much like the rebuke of Jesus, and so we try to avoid that. Peter, though, rebukes Jesus, and then Jesus rebukes Peter. In fact, it's important to note that this is some of the harshest language that you will ever hear Jesus use. Yeah, I understand how Jesus went to the religious leaders, the Pharisees, and all those guys, and basically called them empty suits. Whitewashed tombs was the term that he used. We understand the empty suit language, right? And that's essentially what he said about them. Jesus got angry in the temple, certainly. But one thing Jesus never called the religious leaders was Satan. In fact, when you look at Scripture, even though Satan actually entered into Judas, nowhere do we see that Jesus ever called Judas Satan. And as far as I can see, the only person in Scripture other than Satan himself that Jesus ever referred to or called Satan was Peter. How'd you like to have that on your tombstone, right? The only person ever called Satan by Jesus. No, that's not something we long for. There's something else about this, though. As I said, it's kind of just off a little bit for me. It's not only that Peter rebukes Jesus. Certainly I understand the rebuke of Jesus on Peter, but it's the context, really the timing, if you would, of this whole situation. You see, in the preceding verses, which I said we were going to get into, verse 13 through 15, this is what we read. It says, "When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' Well, they replied, 'Some say John the Baptist. Some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets.' Then he," meaning Jesus, "asked them," he said, 'But who do you say that I am?'" Who do you say that I am? Isn't that a great question? I mean, if Jesus was to come here and ask us that question, I wonder what our responses might be. Who do we say, who do I say that Jesus is? Pay attention to Peter's response, because I love this. It tells us in verse 16, it says, "Simon Peter answered," now read it with me, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Say that again. "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." I don't know about you, but when I hear those words, I'm like, Peter gets it, right? And Peter understands very clearly who Jesus is. You're talking about a concise statement of faith. That pretty much lays it out there, doesn't it? You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. Wow. That's pretty good, isn't it? Are you guys even awake? Okay, you are. Good. It wouldn't change how I'm doing this. It just makes me feel more comfortable knowing that you're not just sticking out there, you know? But I love Jesus' response. Because Jesus comes with highest praise of his own in verse 17. He says, you are blessed, Simon, son of John. Because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock, upon you, I will build my church. And all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Let me help you wrap your brain around this. Jesus is there and he looks at Peter and says, Peter, you are blessed. How many of us would love to have Jesus say that to us? Anyone? Okay. He said, not only are you blessed, Peter, but you didn't learn this from man. You got this from God. In other words, you have the wisdom of God. Pretty good stuff, right? And then he looks at him and he says, Peter, your name means rock. And upon you, upon this rock, I will build my church. Wow. And then he says, and I give you the keys of my kingdom. Well, yeah. Right? I mean, if you are Peter, don't you think that your spiritual chest, you're feeling pretty good about your spiritual stuff right now, aren't you, Don? I mean, wow. Boom! Super Christian, right? Woo! That's what you're thinking. That's what's happening here. You talk about a spiritual high. And then Jesus kind of changes gears just a little bit. Peter has claimed who Jesus is. Jesus tells Peter these wonderful things. And then Jesus changes direction just a little bit. And he begins to unveil a future, not only for Peter, but also for the disciples in verse 21. It says, from that time on, as we read, Jesus begins to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Now before, he said some really encouraging things to Peter. You are blessed. You didn't learn that from man, but you learned it from God. Upon you I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom. But Jesus said something else here. He says, now, Jesus himself, I must go to Jerusalem. I must suffer many things at the hands of the Jewish leaders. I must be killed and I must be raised on the third day. Wow. Now we look at that, and to us it's like, okay. Because we're not in that context. Understand the circumstances that are happening here. See, for us, all of that, when Jesus says he has to go to Jerusalem, he has to suffer many things, he must be killed, and he must be raised on the third day, all of that, that's old news to us. And quite honestly, I don't care if you've been raised in the church or not, many of us, if not all of us, have heard this before. I mean, if you're a Christian, certainly you understand the whole Easter, Good Friday thing, right? But if you're outside the church, if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, you probably have a pretty good idea of the outline. And the outline is that Jesus Christ died upon the cross, and Easter tells us that he rose again 3 days later. And so we get all of that. But the reality is, while this is new, isn't new news to us, it is new news to these disciples. They're hearing this for the first time. And the thought of their Messiah, again, their Messiah. Who is the Messiah? The one who is going to come and remove all of the oppression that God's people are facing by the Roman government. All of that oppression is going to be removed because the Messiah is going to make it happen. And so the thought of their Messiah, the thought of their master being killed in Jerusalem would have left them stunned as they sat there. What is he talking about? You can almost see the disciples whispering to each other, like, what in the world? Did you hear this guy? What is he talking about? Well, Kevin, you mean, didn't they hear the part about him being raised from the dead? Yeah, they didn't have a category for that either. Right? I mean, imagine, if you would, that here we have a casket. We're doing a funeral service for someone who has passed. And all of a sudden they sit up in their casket, climb out, and join us for lunch. Is that a wow moment or what? Let's be honest. While we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, we still don't have a category for that. And so for them, they don't have a category in their mind when Jesus says that He's going to rise from the dead. It's very easy to understand why they kind of just gloss by that. In fact, in Mark's parallel account of this story, he adds that Jesus spoke plainly about the future. It means He didn't pull any punches. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't say, well, there just might be a little trouble in Jerusalem. None of this makes sense to them. None of it. And so Peter does what we typically do when we've got Uncle Bob, who's a little crazy. I think I should have used Uncle Bob because that's my brother's name. And yeah. But he's crazy, right, Natalie? Okay, Uncle Bob is crazy. Anybody have a crazy relative? Okay. Anybody the crazy relative? Okay. Yeah, Dale, we would all agree with you. Amen. Yeah. And so this didn't make sense. And so Peter does what we have a tendency to do when someone is, well, crazy talk, right? He takes them aside and tries to knock some sense into them verbally. I'm not talking about getting physical. Trying to set straight the individual. And so this is what he does with Jesus. He pulls Jesus aside so he can try to set Jesus straight. He says, come on, Jesus. Jesus, understand. This is not going to happen to you. Thinking that Jesus had momentarily lost his mind. And beyond that, he's sitting there thinking, listen, there's 12 of us. They are going to have to go through all 12 of us in order to get to you. We will make sure that you are saved. This is just on the heels of, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And now he's rebuking the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Well, that's some moxie right there, huh? That's some courage. But let's be honest, don't we do this? Don't we? I mean, we enter into a place like this and we worship on a Sunday and then the rest of the week, well, maybe not even wait until the rest of the week. We might even be doing it right here, right now. God, really? God, let me explain something. You sit down, God. Let me tell you how it really should be. Because what you're asking me to do, that's just crazy talk. We do the same thing. So is it really courageous? You see, what it leads me to do is ask the question as to why. Why would Peter do such a thing? Well, I believe the first reason that Peter pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him is because he loved Jesus. He loved Jesus so much, and he wanted to help Jesus avoid the pain of the crucifixion. And we get that, don't we? Don't we get that? I mean, when we love someone, do we really want them to suffer? The answer to that should be no. We don't want them to suffer. And so we understand that. We might even consider his gesture as being noble, even though it's misguided. So he loved Jesus. There's another reason why I think, though, that he perhaps did this is because he didn't understand God's plan. You see, Peter called Jesus the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Remember that? You are the Messiah, you are the Son of the living God. But let me just say that his picture of the Messiah, his picture of the Son of the living God, in no way included the shame, in no way included the harm, in no way included the public crucifixion that he would have experienced upon the cross. He simply could not grasp how someone who is so good, how someone who is so holy, how someone who is so righteous, how someone who is so pure as Jesus was, all of those things, how that individual could possibly suffer and die a criminal's death upon the cross. You add to that the fact that, again, he thinks and believes with all his heart that Jesus is the Messiah, that he is the one who is going to come and he's going to take names and so forth, kick tail on the Romans. All of that just doesn't make sense in that moment. And so this discussion or this statements that Jesus is making is just crazy talk. But there's another reason, I think. I think not only did he love Jesus, and not only did he not understand God's plan, but I also think he thought he knew God's will better than Jesus does. Again, we get that, don't we? We see that in our own lives. And what's interesting to me is that in this moment, in this circumstance where Peter and Jesus find themselves, is that Peter actually stands in direct opposition to God's plan to bring salvation to the world. God's plan is Jesus was going to have to go to Jerusalem. Jesus was going to have to suffer. Jesus was going to have to die upon the cross, and Jesus would rise again. Those four things. That was the plan of God. You know what Peter said? It ain't going to happen. So he stands in direct opposition to God's plan. I think there's something else, though, as well. And I believe it's that Peter wanted a kingdom without a cross. He wanted a kingdom without a cross. And while we may not understand it in our culture today, it certainly makes sense if we look at what it meant to the Jews in the first century. I mean, today we wear crosses around our necks, and in our sanctuaries we have crosses. We have crosses on the outside of our buildings. But no Jew would have understood such a thing in that period of time. You see, to the Jew, the cross was brutal. It meant public, bloody, painful, agonizing, shameful death. If we want a modern counterpart to that, it would be that we would take it and hang a large picture of a gas chamber in Auschwitz in front of our sanctuary. That's what it would be like. Now, do you really think we ought to hang a picture like that? No. That's just crazy talk. And yet that is what the Jews saw with the cross. And so, all fairness to Peter, it's easy to understand why he rebuked Jesus, because he loved him. Because he thought Jesus' plan was completely nuts. There's no way. You're the Messiah. How is that possibly going to happen? And I think a lot of it's because he misunderstood who the Messiah was. And I think the reason we try to argue with God is because we often are confused by who we think God is as well. Now, Peter's rebuke wasn't the only rebuke in our story. Jesus rebukes Peter, but it's different. Peter, remember, took Jesus aside privately. But Mark, in his gospel, he tells us that Jesus took Peter, and in front of all the disciples, he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Which leaves another question. Same question, but the question would be, why did Jesus use such strong language? Why did Jesus call Peter Satan? Well, I think Peter, first of all, was guilty of false intimacy. But I also think he was ignorant in his presumption. So he was guilty of ignorant presumption. What do I mean by that? Don't forget the context in which all of this takes place. Jesus had just given some glowing statements, some wonderful things to Peter. Being human, it's very easy for us to understand how Peter could be filled with pride. We get that, right? I mean, you are the rock. You are getting the keys to the kingdom. Never mind that all of the apostles were given keys. Never mind that the church of Jesus Christ is given keys to the kingdom. But in his mind, because Jesus had said all these wonderful things about him, he feels like Jesus is putting him on a spiritual plateau, if you would. And so therefore, he has a right in his mind to take Jesus aside and do a bit of accountability counseling. How's that? Or maybe you heard iron sharpens iron. Maybe that's what he's doing here. Or maybe it's just a one man helping another man sort of thing. So Jesus is looking at this. And Jesus is saying, no, you've got this ignorant presumption. Just because I said these things about you doesn't give you the right. And let me say that of us as well. Just because we are children of the King doesn't mean, well, we can question God, but when he calls us to step out in faith, doesn't give us the right to say no. We need to do it. We need to do what God calls us to do. The second thing I would say is that Jesus knew who ultimately was behind Peter's well-meaning but misguided words. You see, Jesus knew that Satan's desire was that Jesus would avoid the cross. Why? Because it is the way of salvation. You may remember in the wilderness that Satan had taken Jesus to a high mountain. Jesus is there, and he's in this high mountain, and Satan is there. And Satan looks at him and says, look, I'm going to give you all the kingdoms of the world. All the kingdoms of the world. Let me ask you a question. From a human standpoint, is that enticing or what? As far as the eye can see, it's yours. All you have to do is one thing. You know what that one thing was? Bow down and worship. All he had to do, all Jesus had to do, he wanted all that he could see. All he had to do was bow down and worship Satan. It was a seductive temptation. Why go through the pain of the cross? Why go through all of that? And yet Jesus stayed on course to what God had called him to do. And even though Peter wasn't conscious of being used by Satan, that's exactly what was happening. The third thing I think we see here is that Jesus knew he had to go to the cross. He knew he had to go to the cross in order to provide salvation for the world. That's why he used the word must. I must go to Jerusalem. I must suffer. I must die. I must rise from the dead. There is absolutely nothing here that is going to happen by chance. In fact, Eugene Peterson, he's the one who has put together the message. I won't call it a Bible. I don't believe it's a translation. But he says this about this text. He says, but Jesus didn't swerve. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. And it's a good lesson for us, because so often we fall in the same boat that Peter finds himself in. You see, Peter had no idea how God works. To Peter, the cross was evidence of failure. We say it again. To Peter, the cross was evidence of failure, but to Jesus, the cross was the reason why he came to earth. To Peter, the cross meant that Jesus had been defeated, but to Jesus, the cross was the means by which Satan would ultimately be defeated. To Peter, the cross meant that evil had won, but to Jesus, the cross was the path to final victory. To Peter, the cross meant that Jesus was gone forever, and yet to Jesus, he understood that the cross led to the empty tomb. To Peter, the cross was a badge of shame, and yet to Jesus, the cross is what brought salvation to the world. To Peter, the cross meant that he had no message to preach. Let me say that. To Peter, he had the thought that the cross means there's no message to preach. But to Jesus Christ, the cross is the message that we're called to preach. To Peter, the cross made no sense, but to Jesus, the cross displayed the wisdom of God. And so greatly did Peter and Jesus differ at this point that all Jesus could say was, Satan, get behind me. You've been a stumbling block to me. He says that to Peter. And what he's saying is you are a death stick to me. What is that? A death stick is a stick that is placed there in a trap. It was used to catch animals. And you would take it, and if that stick was bumped against, that stick would fall, and the trap would catch whatever creature that was. And he's saying very clearly that you are being a death stick to God's plan of salvation. But what does it mean to us today? How does it apply to our life? Well, first of all, I would say this, is that good men sometimes do the devil's work. Good men sometimes do the devil's work. Was Peter a good man? Yeah, he was. I really don't think Peter was trying to be wicked. I don't think he was trying to be mean. I think he was looking out for Christ. I think he was doing everything out of love. His foolish words here can't cancel out the brave statement of faith a few moments earlier. He was undeniably right in what he said, that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, but also he's just as wrong here. The second thing I think we can learn here is our victories and our defeats often come back to back. Our victories have a tendency to build our confidence. And when Peter heard these wonderful things that Jesus was saying about him, did it go to his head? Probably. I get that. But as quickly as he rose, he also fell. And the same is true for us. So often we're like Elijah. We win some battles on Mount Carmel and then we run with fear the next day from Jezebel, right? And Satan, I will tell you, has a whole bunch of Jezebels. There's a lot of death traps sitting around, a lot of death sticks he puts in our path. Why? Because he's smart. Satan knows that the best time to trap us is after we've experienced a great victory. Why? Because we're celebrating, because we're in victorious mode and our defenses are down, our emotions take over, our guard lowers, and we say things and we do things that later we're going to regret. The third lesson I think is for us here is that our closest friends sometimes may be our worst enemies. Our closest friends may sometimes be our worst enemies. Should we question Peter's loyalty at all in this? No. I don't think so. I think he was being extremely loyal to Jesus. At least he thought he was. But what he said was foolish. It was also wrong thinking. And that's what makes it so tricky. He loves the Lord with all his heart. And what we find is that our friends are the ones who say that they love us the most. At times may be used by Satan to try to sidetrack us spiritually. It can come from our spouse, it can come from our children, it can come from our co-workers, from our parents, whoever it may be. And in their attempt to protect us, and that's what Peter was doing, in their attempt to protect us from what they perceive as danger, they may actually be being used by Satan as a tool to keep us from doing God's will. Because our friends may not understand God's call upon our life, so they try to dissuade us. Now, hear me very clearly. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to their cautions. You caught that, right? It doesn't mean that we just blow them off. It means that we sit down and we digest what it is that they say, because sometimes they sense something that we've missed. That is a perfect description of my wife. I am one who sees details, very much so. I mean, you can move just a few things and I'll see it. Susan doesn't with that. But when it comes to something in our life where God is leading us somewhere, or she feels I've missed something in that relationship with Christ, she'll sit me down. And gently, most of the time, she'll lay it out there and say, I think you've missed this. And we talk it through. And I trust her judgment greatly when it comes to spiritual things because of that. Consider a young person who senses God's call to the mission field. I will tell you that my oldest daughter, Kaylee, and her husband, John, I believe have a call in their life right now to pursue the mission field. In fact, I know that they're in prayer right now, and I invite you to be in prayer for them, of where that may be. I know that there's been discussion of Peru. I also, ironically, was in discussion with John Heater, and John Heater is the head of Teams for Medical Missions, and John and I would agree on this. That's just a terrible name. That's why he used the T4MM kind of thing, because they do so much more than medical missions. And one of their primary things that they do is they are developing pastors, nationals, if you would, that are part of the Jamaican community to be pastors in that culture. And so they're training them to do just that. And that is the heart of my son-in-law. He desperately wants to be a part of something like that. And so a connection was made this week in a unique way. Now think about how God works. Some of you may remember Teams for Medical Missions lost 2 missionaries. They were murdered a couple of months ago. Do you remember that? One of the missionaries who was killed's family lives in Ankeny, Iowa. How many have ever heard of Ankeny? Okay? Well, Ankeny is where Kaylee and John, my Kaylee, her husband, and our little grandson Carter, that's where they live. Isn't that cool? And so I got word this week that the daughter of the missionary that's in Ankeny, we don't know where she's at spiritually. My understanding is there's doubts to her faith. But her dad, who's now murdered, you following all this? Was helping her build her home. Of course, now that's kind of on hold. And I was in discussion with my son-in-law because his brother-in-law is a contractor. And seeing how we can't get the Christian community to rise up and help this young lady get her house built and in that share Christ. You got all that? And so John, my son-in-law, was asking me questions about who's this organization. And I began to describe it. He goes, really? He said, I'd love to talk to that guy, John Heater. And so now we're going to hook him up and give him a chance to talk. But it would not shock me that God uses even that circumstance of death and tragedy to be a vessel by which my son-in-law and daughter end up in Jamaica. That would be God. Now, they may not end up there. I may be way ahead of the game. I don't want to sit here and think I know God's plans better than He does. But I will tell you, when my daughter and son-in-law were telling us about the possibility of going to the mission field, I will tell you my first thought, I didn't say it, but my first thought was, wait a minute. There's a whole lot of lost people here in America. In fact, there's a whole lot of lost people right here in the area around our church. And so if you want to be missionaries, why don't you come into our area and bring our grandson closer to us? Right? Amen. I get it. You know, you can make more money in the States, and you know what you can do with that money is you can support missionaries. Or, do I really want my grandchild raised in Jamaica? Those are human thoughts, are they not? And it would be very easy for me to go and share those things with Kaylee and John because I love them so much. And I love my relationship with them. And feel as though I am directing them in God's way, and yet the reality is I am nothing more than a death stick to what God perhaps wants to do in their life. Does that make sense? Or the husband that says, honey, I think we need to give more to the Lord's work this year. The wife's first reaction is, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. We need to pay our bills. And in that, it's not that she's being hateful. It's not that she doesn't love the Lord. But she may be a death stick keeping them from doing what God has called them to do. Or a woman who is successful in business decides to leave her career, her successful career, and to take a position that is going to give her much less pay because it leads her to be in ministry. And her friends look at her and say, are you nuts? Don't you understand the whole concept is to climb the corporate ladder? It's not that they hate her. They love her. And they want what's best for her life. But when we set out to serve the Lord, let's be honest, we can always think of 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't or why we need to play it safe. And if we don't think of it, our friends will. So easy to take the road of least resistance, isn't it? And it's so hard to take the road that leads to the cross. And I will tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there's not many people around us who will cheer us when we take the road to the cross. And yet that's what we're called to do. In 1839, there were two men from London Missionary Society. They landed in New Hebrides, a chain of 80 islands in the South Pacific. Those two missionaries were killed in November of that year, and they were eaten by the cannibals. And eventually, other missionaries came. Can you imagine what their family members thought? They came and shared the gospel, and it began to take root on some of those islands. And 19 years later, so not 1839, that would have been 1858. Anybody here alive in 1858? Nobody? Okay. In 1858, a young man by the name of John Catton set sail for the islands. And when he announced his desire to go, there was a man by the name of Mr. Dixon who exploded and said, the cannibals, you will be eaten by the cannibals. I love Patton's response. Now, keep in mind, we don't talk like this anymore. This is a type of language that we don't necessarily use. But he said this. He said, Mr. Dixon, you are advanced in years now. Translation, you're old, right? And your own prospect is soon to be laid in the grave. In other words, not only are you old, but you will be dead soon. Right? Do we get that? Mr. Dixon, you are advanced in years now, and your own prospect is soon to be laid in the grave, there to be eaten by worms. He goes on, he says, I confess to you that if I can but live and die serving and honoring the Lord Jesus, it will make no difference to me whether I am eaten by cannibals or by worms. And in the great day of my resurrection body will rise as fair as yours in the likeness of our risen Redeemer. Isn't that cool? Some spiritual kahunas right there, right? I mean, this is in-your-face spiritual moxie. Wow. Wow. This guy was interested and loved this young man. Didn't want him to experience death, to be eaten by cannibals. God's plan didn't make sense. But yet to Patton it did. He said, you know what? I'm going to do what God wants me to do. What about me? Do I demand that God's plans make sense before I follow them? Do I demand God's plans make sense before I follow them? See, sometimes we want something that God doesn't offer. God doesn't offer us a shiny cross. God doesn't offer us a comfortable cross. God doesn't offer us a cross that we can wear under our clothes, or a cross without any blood or without any pain. He's given us the cross of Jesus Christ. The blood-stained cross of Jesus Christ. Because apart from the bloody cross of Jesus Christ, there is no way of salvation. It was on the cross that the wrath of God was satisfied. It was on the cross that the sin and the price of sin was paid. And it was on the cross that our guilt was removed. What I love about this story is in it we see really the grace of God at work in Peter's life. Peter falls again and again and again. I relate to that. And in each time he gets up with the power and the strength of Almighty God. To the point that one day he stands on the day of Pentecost. After all these events have happened, Jesus had gone to the cross. He stands on the day of Pentecost. It's described in Acts chapter 2. And he preaches the gospel. This is what he says. He says that God knew what would happen. And his prearranged plan, God's prearranged plan, was carried out when Jesus was betrayed. With the help of lawless Gentiles, you nailed him to a cross and you killed him. But God released him from the horrors of death and raised him back to life, for death could not keep its grip on him. Wait a minute, Jesus, you don't understand. This can't happen. This will never happen to you. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's not going to happen. They've got to come through me. Get behind me, Satan. What? And then he preaches that God released him from the horrors of death. He was killed upon the cross, and God raises him back to life. For death could not keep him in its grip. 3,000 men were saved at that day, that message. And keep in mind, they only counted men in that period of time. Okay? So likely many more were saved. The 3,000 men were saved that day. When Paul proclaimed the gospel of the message of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ had to suffer, that Jesus Christ had to die, that Jesus Christ had to be buried in the tomb, that Jesus Christ rose again from the dead. He proclaimed that truth, and 3,000 lives were changed. The plan of God. Because Peter came to see that the cross was absolutely necessary in God's plan. Wow. One moment we could be praising God, and the next we could be uttering something foolish, something unkind, something critical. It would be better left unsaid. We can pray, and then we swear. We can quote Scripture, and we can gossip, we can testify for Jesus and play the fool almost in the same breath. It's not the way that it should be. But unfortunately, that's the reality for all of us, very likely. But Peter's story reminds us that it's not one incident that makes a life. Let me say it again. It's not one incident that makes a life. You will fall again and again and again. But getting up is what marks the true child of God. I'll say that Peter was something of a mess. And so are many of us. He was a shaky rock, a fragile stone, an imperfect disciple, and yet God formed him into a rock that in the end could not be shaken. We may be unwittingly used by God, by the devil, to try to thwart the will of God. I'm just so thankful that God's greater. Aren't you? He so desperately wants to work in our life. God comes and He sets us right once again. I'm so glad He does. I'm so glad He does. Let's pray.